critics of Christianity have to deal with objections on Christian terms. Now, here's what I mean by that. All right, when people raise challenges against the Bible, against the knowledge of God, what will often happen is this objection that they raise will entail elements that are not true of Christian teaching and theology. Now, just as I'm thinking about this off of the top of my head, I think there are probably two main ways that this manifests, and that would be intentionally and unintentionally. So, first of all, this may happen intentionally. So it may be that a person makes a claim against the Bible that, teaches that some aspect of it is wrong. For example, they might say that it is wrong for God to be able to take a life when He so chooses. We have instances in the Bible where it appears that God has taken a life either through some sort of supernatural means or either working through some people group to take a life as a result of some sort of judgment on them. Now, the critic is going to say, well, what right does God have to take a life? All right, now, again, as a Christian, I don't want to just arbitrarily say that God has the right to take a life without morally sufficient reason, etc. However, and by the way, Christian teaching and theology would say that in cases where we actually can see this in the Bible, it certainly appears that there were morally sufficient reasons to take these kinds of actions. But even if there wasn't, from a logical perspective, is it justified to say that the person who creates life has the ability and the prerogative to take it? If I'm a painter and I destroy my painting by my own choice, really, nobody else has the right to do that, but I do. It's our natural intuition to understand that somebody who has the ability to and has created something can take it away. Now, I'm not arguing for this, and don't take what I'm saying here and misapply it, but we all have said these things when we get frustrated with our kids. We say something like this: I brought you into this world, and I can take you out of it. Now, as a Christian, I do not believe that that is the case. But when somebody says something like that, we say that because that is our natural intuition. We understand that the person who creates something is the person with the right to destroy it, in one sense, or the person who gives something has the right to take it away. In every sense of the term, life is a gift. God has every right, in virtue of who He is, as the transcendent creator of life, to take it away. Now, I don't think that's how God takes life. And if you will read the Bible, you'll come across morally sufficient reasoning for every act like that was taken. And you'll even see some of these same actions taken against Israel, God's chosen people. So there's a bunch of different things going on in the example I provided. But what I want to point out, the main point I want you to get from that, is that it would be incorrect to say that God cannot take a life based on some humanistic reasoning for doing so. We can't argue as if God were a human. Now, the ironic thing to that particular example is that the core of humanist philosophy today says that it is okay to take a life. Abortion is exactly that, taking a life. That's a side issue, though, and I don't want to get distracted by that. The fact of the matter is, if somebody complains that God has taken a life unjustly in the Bible, we have to actually ask to what degree it was unjust, and we have to logically ask if that was okay. If God really is the creator of life, if that is the case, if it is okay that God speak to that issue, and not only that, but God take those sorts of actions. And I think that we could say that if there really is a God, then that is the case. So that's one example of this happening intentionally. Now, this might happen unintentionally. And when it happens unintentionally, it's usually the case that somebody has brought in some kind of background assumption that they don't realize. And now, one particular way that this manifests itself often is in the case of science versus the Bible. I happen to be what's known as a young age creationist. That is, I believe that the Bible clearly teaches that the earth and universe are somewhere around 6,000 years old. And maybe we won't get into the minutiae here of this, but it's often the case that arguments are leveled against this thinking, and they're based on presuppositions that would not be true under the circumstances. So if somebody says radiometric dating proves the Bible wrong, well, then there are numerous problems with making such a statement. There are assumptions that go into radiometric dating that may or may not be correct. Especially the main one of those is uniformitarianism. I just did a podcast on this recently. Okay, so if somebody assumes uniformitarianism, and here's a really good example related to that, I'll get specific on this. Somebody says, well, there's no radiometric evidence that a flood happened 4,500 years ago. The problem is that if you look at radiometric timescales for a global flood event 4,500 years ago, that is to beg the question. In other words, that is to assume that the methods are reliable that give you millions of years, and to assume uniformitarianism, the assumption that gives you millions of years, without properly taking into account that the assumption that I believe the Bible gives is that millions of years were not there. So what you have to realize is that it's not the data, it's not the facts that are telling us that there are millions of years of time separating us and the event of creation. It's an interpretation of the facts that are built on myriad assumptions, not the least of which are a few unprovable philosophical assumptions. What I've presented here is a bunch of I've introduced a bunch of issues because of the peripheral examples that I've used. And we talk about those separate issues on different occasions. But what I just wanted to get across to you here is that you have to deal with objections on Christian terms. And when you're talking to an atheist or some sort of critic of the Bible, you have to make sure that they are dealing with objections on Christian terms. Logically speaking, when somebody formulates an objection based on a view that is not held by the person that they object to, this is called a straw man. They've set up a straw man and attacked the straw man. They think they have a successful argument, but they haven't argued against the view. They've argued against their false misrepresentation of that view. So we have to deal with objections against Christianity on Christian terms in order for those objections to go through.